Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into the origins and evolution of American government. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also the host of this discussion. And here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Agnes, thank you very much, and welcome to a Wednesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is the 26th day of July in the year 2017, and it is a pleasure to be with you on the second consecutive day of live broadcasts. I know that it's a very, very minor thing to be excited about, but I am excited about it. And I want to thank you for tuning in. I want to thank you for your continued support of this program and of Bob Kincaid, Agnes, and the folks at Head On, who are just doing a great job keeping this program and this kind of programming, on the air. It is a very, very important thing, and of course, as we continue to watch news both nationally and internationally, we begin to realize how vital it is to maintain an alternative, to have an alternative voice, an alternative point of view. It seems to me that as we proceed further and further into national politics during this administration, the need for what Head On stands for and is set out to do becomes clearer and clearer and more significant. So thank you very, very much for your continued support of the network of Bob and Agnes and those folks, and of this program as well. I appreciate it. I know they appreciate it as well. We would love to hear from you if you have thoughts or concerns or issues that you would like to share with our other listeners. We invite you to call in. If you do, Agnes is in the studio. She'll get you on the air very quickly. It's very easy and painless, and I promise you that you will be welcome. Our phone number, this is the number that you would call to make that happen, is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. If you'd like to drop me an email and trust me to get your thoughts or your concerns on the air for you, I'd be glad to do that. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906, lowercase, all one word, @gmail.com. And I remind you once again of our Facebook page. For those regular users of Facebook, you know how easy it is. We're going to be talking quite a bit about Facebook today, actually. If you go to the homepage of Facebook, facebook.com, there's a search box at the top of the page. And if you type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you will have access to our Facebook page. I mentioned yesterday that I was going to put something on that page before we get on the air today, and I didn't quite make it, but I will make it after the program is over today. I'm going to open with the conclusion of the piece we finished with yesterday, and then get into something else related to Facebook. And I'm pretty well committed to posting the document that I've been focusing on over the last half hour of yesterday's program and the beginning of today. And I'll be putting that document on our Facebook page. So again, if you go to the search box, just type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will have access to our Facebook page, and there's plenty of opportunity there for comment. You can comment on Facebook, you can comment on by sending me an email, you can comment by calling live in one of our future programs and making reference to what you saw on the Facebook page, and we can talk about that. The things that I put on Facebook, I put there for purposes of discussion and reaction and comment. So please feel that the very fact that something is on our Facebook page, it's there because we solicit your comments and your thoughts and your reactions to some of the things that are there. I've been reading a few articles. I'll probably touch on a few of them today that I think probably deserve to be to be read by a number of people, and I may put a few of those on Facebook, a few links to these articles, and put them on Facebook as well. But the first thing I want to do is load the document that we started with yesterday. As you know, just to kind of briefly touch on the issues that are getting all the attention nationally. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that because all you have to do is is go to any cable network, whether it's CNN or MSNBC or Fox or whatever, and you'll get all the conversation on what's going on in Washington that you can handle. It's not clear. It's in many ways quite unnerving to me, at least. Not only some of the things that are happening there, but the way that these things are happening as well. I think this healthcare situation is absolutely bizarre. I think probably even though that he's suffering from a serious illness, I think there was really some wisdom in John McCain's comments yesterday. I was a little bit confused and disappointed, very honestly, by his vote, because his vote was not at all consistent with his comments. But he made the point that this issue of health care, given the size and the significance of the issue and the number of people that it will affect, needs to be done in a bipartisan, cross-the-aisle manner. And the fact of the matter is that's not happening. It's being rammed through in secret. People are being asked to vote for things they haven't even seen, let alone read and digested and discussed. There's going to be, according to Mitch McConnell, in the unique set of rules that he's come up with, there's going to be an opportunity. He said, I heard him say that this morning, there's going to be an opportunity for offering amendments from the floor. But the reality is the way the votes are laying themselves out, there's no way that any of these amendments are going to get serious attention, especially the Democratic amendments. I'm struck every time I think about it by a comment that Mitch McConnell made several weeks ago about his determination to not include the Democrats in the health care discussions or policy development at all. And his reaction or reason for that has stuck with me ever since I heard it. And that is that we really can't afford to waste time listening to one amendment after the other advocating universal one-payer health care. And the implication is that that is the only agenda item that the Democrats have, that they have nothing to contribute to health care in America except that. I think I've made very clear. I think that is that in itself is a very, very positive position or objective. But the fact of the matter is that there's a lot of other issues related to that, and related to the plan that's up there now, and the assumption that you can take 50% of the Senate, which has traditionally been known as the greatest debating society in the world, and pass legislation that affects tens of millions of people and 1/6 of the nation's budget. You can do it with only half of the members being represented, and I say half advisedly because, as we know, Vice President Pence cast the deciding vote yesterday, making the result 50-51. I was struck by Donald Trump's comments in the Rose Garden afterwards, that he said that the Republicans got 51 votes for moving the legislation forward, and he said I can't really remember what the other number was, the losing number. The fact of the matter is it's 50, and I think that's very significant. Of course, that's exactly the same way that Neil Gorsuch gained his appointment to the Supreme Court. So the fact that decisions are being made like this, by demanding almost absolute voter loyalty, I think is extremely significant and extremely dangerous. I'm struck by President Trump's comments in reaction to yesterday's vote, more specifically to the 2 no votes that came from Republican women, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Susan Collins of Maine. And basically what he said was something to the effect that this is very unfortunate. I feel very, very sorry for them, or something like that. The implication is that bad things are liable to happen to those 2 people politically as a result of this vote. That kind of intimidation, it seems to me, is frightening in a system which was created to promote discussion, debate, compromise, and negotiation. And it seems to me John McCain's comment on the floor of the Senate yesterday, when he told his colleagues, we're not getting anything done, folks. We're not getting anything done. Now, the reality is, under the circumstances of what is liable to get done, I'm pretty content right now with not getting anything done. But the reality is there's no leadership coming from the Hill at all. And it's frightening. There's no across the aisle effort on either side. The Democrats continue to talk about it, but that's all they can do is talk because they don't have the votes or the power to do anything. And the fact of the matter is it's extremely dangerous. This degree of partisanship, this idea of total lockstep voting. Let's face it, I've been thinking about this for a while, and I didn't really think about this yesterday when I was thinking about today's program. But the more I've thought about it this morning, the more I have pretty well concluded that this is something that deserves a comment, I believe. When we look at what happened in the Senate, when Mitch McConnell was unable to get the 50 votes he needed for the Senate health care bill, 50 being the target because Vice President Pence would cast the deciding vote. He was unable to get it. And part of the reason was there was such wide variance among Republicans in terms of ideology. You had the extreme conservatives, the people on the right, who felt that the only thing they could handle, given their campaign promises, was the total repeal of the Affordable Care Act. Then on the other side, you had more moderate Republicans who were really concerned about the severe cuts in Medicaid associated with that bill. And senators from states like West Virginia and Kentucky, for example. Here in West Virginia, Shelley Moore Capito has pretty well committed herself publicly to not being able to stomach these kinds of severe cuts because in reality, West Virginia probably has the greatest crossover, the greatest number of people that were put onto the expanded Medicaid rolls under the Affordable Care Act of any other state proportionally. So a lot of people in this state are going to be harmed, seriously harmed, if these cuts are allowed to go through. There's some debate right now. In fact, Agnes and I were talking about this while we were chatting before we went on the air today, that there's some question and some hint coming from Capitol Hill that Shelley Moore Capito is saying privately that she'll probably vote for the bill. The fact of the matter is Democrats and commentators are publicly stating that this thing is so hot, so volatile, that a vote for this bill could conceivably cost a member of the Senate or the House in the next election. It could cost them their jobs. I think in West Virginia, it's unclear to me what the reaction might be in terms of Shelley Moore Capito should we vote for this bill. Should she vote for this bill? But the fact of the matter is the demands are for lockstep voting. The Democrats are voting as a block, 48, plus the 2 independents in the Senate making the 50. Bernie Sanders and I can't remember the other senator from Maine. King, I think it is. I think it's King. But anyway, they're voting in lockstep, and the Republicans are voting in lockstep. And when two Republicans voted no yesterday, the president got on it very, very clearly. The implication is that Mitch McConnell's got to get his act together and rein in those two mavericks. Think about this. The Republican Party Senate could not get the votes necessary to pass the Senate version of health care because of the ideological differences within the Senate, because there was such variation between moderates and conservatives. So you had, during the Senate, when the Senate bill was defeated for the first time, you had Rand Paul and Susan Collins being the two of the negative votes. And then later on, at the last minute, a number of others, including Shelley Moore Capito, came on board and said they were going to vote no. And at that point, McConnell decided not to have the vote, but rather to pull the bill. But the difference, ideological differences between Rand Paul and Susan Collins speak to the fact that the Republicans are not ideologically all on one page. If they were, the Senate bill would have passed. But they're not. Here's my point. If there are serious ideological differences within the Senate, and the challenge for Mitch McConnell is to find ways to get both of these constituents to vote together by patching and pasting and adding to, and putting sweeteners in the legislation in order to win one particular group or another. If that's necessary, if that kind of magical managing is necessary for Mitch McConnell in order to maintain the solidity of the Republican bloc in the Senate, then it stands to reason that if there are those ideological differences, there ought not to be 50-vote majorities. All 50 Republicans in the Senate ought not to be voting the same way if the ideological differences are as deep as they appear. So, and this is what I was thinking about this morning. So let's take that at face value. If they are ideologically opposed to each other on certain issues, then what is it that is driving them to vote together despite their ideological differences? The only answer, it seems to me, is big money, is campaign contributions. And that's frightening, because that means that big money is controlling the electoral process. Forget Russia. Forget the hacking. The hell with that. What the attention on Russia is doing is taking the focus away from the real problem in our political system, which is the influence of big money, of Wall Street money and corporate money, in buying the votes of these people. But the fact of the matter is, we're not buying the votes. That's positive if you think about it, just in terms of the meaning of the words. If you're buying votes, that means you're getting something for your money. That's positive. In other words, you're getting the giver of the money is getting a positive vote. In exchange for the campaign contribution. The senator or the congressman is getting the campaign contribution in exchange for his vote. It's kind of a quid pro quo kind of thing. This is even worse than that, because we're not talking about buying votes in a positive sense. We're talking about threatening to use big money to defeat recalcitrant members of both the House and the Senate. If you persist in not going along, in not voting with the rest of your party, then this big money is going to see to it that you don't get reelected. Because what they're going to do is heavily fund an opponent. And that opponent is probably not going to have a political record. They're going to be novices. They don't need to have any political experience because they're being told how to vote anyway. So all they are is automatons. They're just automatic votes that, in order to continue funding and keep their jobs, all they have to do is go along. They don't have to understand. They don't have to care. They don't have to have any ideological commitment to anything. They don't have to have principles. They don't have to have values. They don't have to have severe or serious concerns for their constituents. They don't have to have any of that. All they've got to do is say, if you give me enough money to continually get reelected, I'll vote however you want. That's not buying votes. That's negative. That's threatening defeat if you step out of line. That, I will suggest to you, promises the death knell of our political system, because it makes reaching across the aisle, negotiation and compromise, impossible. And ultimately, what it does is render the losing side, right now it's the Democrats, renders the losing side able to only make noise, but not effectively being able to do anything. Rather than sending our voters to the polls to elect representatives and senators who will represent them in pursuit of the public interest, in pursuit of the general welfare, we are asking our voters to continue to vote for people who have made a bargain with the devil. They have agreed to sell their souls in order to keep their job. They don't have any Republican record. You can't run against them in the election because they don't have a record to run against. The only reason they're there is because they promised to be loyal. And in exchange for that promise to be loyal, they're guaranteed as much campaign money as they need to get elected, especially since so many of them are being elected in gerrymandered districts, or in the case of the Senate, in winner-take-all states. And if you think about it, the whole idea of our winner-take-all system, where the winning side wins and the loser loses, those voters, those citizens who voted for the losing side, effectively see their vote wasted. Their votes don't stand for anything or mean anything. And in fact, there was an article, and I'd have to go back through my materials, but I had an article on my desk several weeks ago about a proposal to change that by building in a system of proportional representation into our electoral system, so that everybody's vote will count, not just those who vote for the winner. The whole idea of the winner-take-all system at the beginning was to force compromise, was to force people toward the middle, toward moderation, encourage people to compromise, because the only way to get a majority was to move toward the center of the political spectrum. That's gone now. And what we've got instead are two extremes controlling the shots, calling the shots, as you were, funded by big money and clearly alienating tens of millions of citizens who are questioning seriously whether their votes are worth anything or not. It's the same mentality that elected Donald Trump. Donald Trump promised to break this system, to give the people whose voice hadn't counted some semblance of representation that many of them felt they didn't have without him. And no matter what he does, how bizarre he acts, how foolish he speaks, or how close to the line of legality he comes in terms of some of his actions and behaviors, these people continue to support him because nobody else out there is advocating taking on this system like he did. He touched a nerve. He touched a nerve for millions of people. They know it. They're behind him. And they really aren't interested in quibbling over this policy, this law, that law, the details. All they want to do is support his promise to drain the swamp. Or as he told the Boy Scouts the other day, the cesspool that is Washington, D.C. Can you imagine speaking to 12 to 18-year-old Boy Scouts as President of the United States and referring to Washington as a cesspool? Can you just think about that? I'm somewhat encouraged, not enough to matter. I'm somewhat encouraged by the fact that apparently there are hundreds, if not thousands, of negative reactions coming on social media to the Boy Scouts demanding that Boy Scout officials disavow the president's address Monday night here in southern West Virginia. In our conversation earlier, Agnes and I kind of both agreed that we don't think that's going to happen, because the one thing that the Boy Scouts want to do is avoid political controversy, especially with the President of the United States. So they're probably going to just hang back and hope that this whole thing blows away. But the fact of the matter is, it's encouraging to know that so many parents of Scouts and former Scouts were appalled at some of the comments and the inappropriate nature of the president's address to the Boy Scouts 2 nights ago. My point is the nature and the future of our political system. It seems to me that what we are confronting is a system which is broken. It's broken because big money owns it. All the attention and all the focus of the media and everybody else is on Russian hacking. But the fact of the matter is, even if we were to find a way to stop the Russian hacking, our political system would not be fixed. Because the fact of the matter is, big money controls it, because big money controls our election system and thereby is able to tell our elected representatives and senators what to do and how to vote, and to coerce them when they don't do as they're told. And I think the president's reference the other night in reaction to the healthcare vote, to the votes of Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, speaks volumes about the concerns and the problems I have for our political system. In a diverse population like ours, in a pluralistic society like ours, it is very, very important that everybody feel that their concerns are being weighed and listened to. Not only do we have a president which is raising questions, serious questions, about that commitment to diversity in our society, and we'll get to that in a moment, but the fact of the matter is, big money is causing the entire process to go in a different direction. The Federalist Papers are in danger of meaning less and less in helping us to understand the nature of our political system, of our electoral system. Madison and Hamilton, for the most part, wrote these papers in order to promote the common sense and the wisdom of the very complex political system that Madison was able to devise. It seems unbelievable to me that citizens of this country are willing to stand back and allow for self-interest only big money to sabotage this system and the wisdom of the founders who gave it to us. The only way that this can be happening, it seems to me, is because of what's happening or not happening in our education system. Our young people have no idea the way our system is supposed to work or why it's supposed to work that way. That's what this program is about. That's what the mission of the Virtual Center is about. And it seems to me we have got to be about fixing it and educating ourselves on how this system was designed to work and why it must work that way in order for our society to make it. I think that this is a critically important issue for all of us. It's not even an issue that was on my agenda. But the more I think about what's happening in Washington with this healthcare thing, and I see the differences within the groups in terms of ideology, yet when it comes voting time, everybody falls into line. Even John McCain. And granted, in his defense, in Shelley Moore Capito's defense about their vote yesterday on health care, the fact of the matter is their vote really didn't commit them to anything. They're still in a position where they could vote no against the bill that comes out of the Senate. All they did was vote to proceed with the debate. But given the way the debate is being set up and orchestrated by Mitch McConnell, it smacks of being a political joke. I think Senator Cardin of Maryland made that comment during an interview on one of the networks, that we have to be careful because open debate and freedom to offer amendments means nothing if you're going to get total silence from the other side on the amendments, knowing that they've got all the votes already counted and nothing you propose has a chance of going anywhere. What a disgrace to the legacy and the reputation of our founders. It seems to me it is absolutely disgraceful. What I'd like to do, we're a little bit beyond the bottom of our first hour today. What I'd like to do is go back to yesterday a little bit and recreate the situation recreate where we were when we left the air yesterday at 3 p.m. We were talking, if you remember, we spent the bulk of our time yesterday talking about a research article written by Thomas Edsall on the nature of the Trump constituency, the Trump base. And we shared a number of email quotations from prominent political scientists and sociologists to Thomas Edsall about the Trump political base. And what we had done, what Edsall does for us, actually, is pull a lot of this together and reach some really profound conclusions, it seems to me, about what this base is telling us about our society and about the direction of our society. One of the things that we picked up from yesterday's discussion of Tom Edsall's research piece was that it appears from what all the experts are telling us that white working class middle America, the lower middle class, is going through the same kind of disintegration process that urban America underwent in the 1960s and 70s. The same kinds of things that happened to the black family in urban America that Senator Moynihan wrote so much about and addressed, the issues of black poverty and the issues of the disintegration of the black family in urban America, the emergence of female-dominated families, one-parent families raising children, and what that threatened to do to our society and to the stability of our cities. That seems to be the same thing that middle-class white America sees itself in danger of going through now. And many of those people who voted for Donald Trump are still working, are still in functional families, as Edsall tells us, still attend church, but they see the handwriting on the wall. And they see the same kinds of things threatening them that befell the black community a generation ago. And they're looking desperately for an out. And they latched on to Donald Trump as that out. But as Edsall said, and I can't disagree, I really can't. He doubts very much whether Donald Trump is up to a challenge this significant or this huge. I don't even think Donald Trump really understands it. He knows what works. He knows what these people want to hear, therefore he's willing to say it. But live it? That's another issue, it seems to me. So that's one thing we got out of yesterday's program, is the fact that history is repeating itself. The other thing we're seeing happen as part of that disintegration, if you will, is what the sociologists are telling us about the institution of marriage. The data is clearly indicating that the same kinds of things are happening to white, uneducated working people in this country as happened to blacks in the inner city a generation ago. They weren't able to get jobs. They weren't able to maintain the stability and vitality of their families. It was the wives, the women, who were able to get work, not the men. The jobs that were disappearing for black men. And that affected their ability to serve or to act as head of household. Consequently, the bills were being paid, the money was being brought in by the female, and increasingly the family in black America was becoming a matriarchy, very similar to what it was in the 17th and 18th century under slavery in the South. It was the women that pretty much held the families together, because what was happening to the male was causing them, in many cases, to leave, to abandon the family, to turn to alcohol, abuse, drugs, all those other things. That's what we're looking at here with white America. And we talked quite a bit yesterday about the role that the institution of marriage has played in American history. Sociologists have been telling us for a long time it's a very significant role. All you have to do is look at the jails and prisons that have been constructed in this country to realize that the major threat of crime focuses principally on single white males. And there's absolutely no question that getting married, entering a stable marriage situation, raising children, and acquiring or assuming the responsibilities that go with parenthood became a significant factor in control of crime in this country. When young men got married, they settled down. They assumed their responsibilities to work, to provide for the family, to raise children, and all the other positive things. They became vital parts in their communities. They joined bowling leagues. They participated in community affairs. They participated in PTAs, in school groups and events. And the result was that crime was being significantly controlled. Now, with what's happening in today's world to the white, uneducated, working class population in middle America in this country, those kinds of controls are disappearing. The data tells us that significantly more white families are being headed by only one parent. And increasingly that parent is the woman, is the female, because she's the one that can get a job. The jobs that are disappearing are the jobs that men did. And what we're talking about when we talk about retraining unemployed or displaced males is training them to assume jobs that were traditionally women's jobs. So that consequently their manhood is being insulted. And many of them are reacting in very negative ways. The opioid addiction rates, suicide rates among this group. This is the only group where life expectancies are going down rather than up. So all of these things factor in to what's happening. What we need to do, it seems to me, and that was my point at the end of yesterday's program, is to begin to take seriously the need to reinvigorate our educational system in such a way that we stop driving people out of the system, rather using it to find ways to include people in the system. Instead of education, school, being a very subtle mechanism to exclude people by telling them, you can't do this, you don't have any skills in this area, you're not very good at math, you don't read well, etc. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't go here, you can't go there. What we've been doing in our educational system is using our system to discriminate, to find the very bright and separate them from the not so bright. Rather than education being a solution to the dangers of inequality and class in America, we've allowed education to become a major factor in promoting class, promoting disunity, promoting inequality in American society. And we see it in the numbers. Those who graduate from college seem to be able to maintain family stability. They're raising their children. They take serious interest in investing in the children's future. They're willing to pay for daycare services and all the rest of it. They make sure that the children belong to groups like the Boy Scouts, like the Girl Scouts, softball, volleyball, all of these organized efforts to integrate and orient young people into the community at large. That seems to be a function focused principally on people who have completed college. For the high school dropout, and increasingly even for the high school graduate who goes no further, meaningful employment is disappearing at a tremendously rapid rate. And this is being reflected in the family, in the way children are raised, and all the rest of it. The data is telling us significantly more children are being born out of wedlock than ever before. Significant numbers of children are being raised in one-parent families. Significant numbers of children, because of the drug situation, significant numbers of children are being raised by their grandparents. We never had experience like this before. So what we've got to do, it seems to me, is find a way to flip this total equation around 180 degrees. We have got to find ways to include these people into our system, not continue to support a system that drives them out. We have a disconnect, it seems to me, between our value system and the realities of the way we raise our young and educate our children. Immigrants continue to flock to this country, as we see with the Trump administration trying to put restrictions on immigration. The reputation of the opportunities available in this country continue to bring people here from all over the world. But the reality is, internally, we've adopted measures which aren't consistent with the ideology that we profess. And we've got to turn it around. And that's the nature of the program, of the educational program that I was introducing at the end of yesterday's program. Literally turning our higher education system on its head. Recognizing, and this is extremely I think, debatable and controversial, but I think it's increasingly becoming more and more realistic, and more people are beginning to recognize it. It used to be that our society, our education system, distributed people on the basis of academic priorities in one direction and getting a job in the other. The assumption was that what people learned in college was not the kind of practical information they needed to make it in the workplace. And so what we had were vocational curriculums in our schools. Those people that were not headed for something in the area of academics, which meant post-secondary education, were encouraged or steered into vocational areas, whether they be male or female. And those areas were pretty well defined by the level of academic preparation required, plus gender. I can remember when I was in school. The fact of the matter is women were not accepted into the natural sciences or into math. Women were encouraged to go into teaching, principally elementary school teaching, so that their minds wouldn't be taxed, but their hearts could be utilized. I can remember in one of the initial education classes that I took as an undergraduate, the instructor saying that when you think about it, everybody has a need to be loved. And those people that have a stronger need than the rest go into elementary education because young kids love them and that's what they crave. And those kinds of things seem to be the determining factor as to where you go and what you did with your education. But I would argue that technological advancement, the internet, and all of the other things associated with it have really changed the game significantly. Increasingly, the skill demands of academics and the skill demands of the workplace have come closer and closer together to the point that they almost match. If you look at the key skills that employers want, and I'm talking about the really top-notch employers, the Googles and the Facebooks and the Amazons and the Microsofts and all the rest of them, what is it they are looking for? They are looking for people with skills. But what they do also is promise you they'll train you in what they want you to know to do the job they have for you. What they want to know is that the person they're getting is trainable. And what that means is they want people who have had training in school and have had experience in working with other people, in cooperative learning, in problem solving, in organizational skills, in research skills, in critical thinking, creativity, looking at traditional problems in new ways, being able occasionally to step out of the box and look at a problem from a totally different perspective, bringing together the variety of talents necessary to solve big problems. All of these things describe and define the demands of the contemporary workplace, where the really meaningful jobs are. Let me tell you that those same skills are what traditionally has defined success in higher education. By teaching the one, we are teaching the other. We are really creating people who have meaningful choice. By educating them with these kinds of skills, we are giving them the option of pursuing higher education, going into the workplace, or for most of them, a blending of the two. Most jobs will continue to require additional training, additional education. So learning must be lifelong. People must come into the workplace knowing how to learn, rather than learning or knowing how to do only one thing, because the pace of change is such that that one thing is going to be outdated pretty quickly. And that's been the problem that our education people have never been able to solve. How do you educate people for the jobs that'll be here a decade from now, 10 years from now, when most of those jobs don't even exist yet? Traditionally, what we've done is prepare students for jobs that are disappearing, which is kind of counterproductive. The fact of the matter is, what we need to do is concentrate on making them self-learners, on giving them the skills they need to continually educate and update themselves so that they aren't thrown off the mark by new challenges. They are challenged by new challenges. They are attracted by new challenges. They are confident in their ability to meet and successfully master new challenges. That's what we're trying to do in this program. That's what we're trying to do. So what is the first requirement? What is the first major change from education as it's traditionally been practiced? The first thing is that we've got to start educating the people we have traditionally excluded. Those that the education system traditionally has labeled as non-educable, they're the ones we have to get to. They're the ones we have to convert into self-learners. I think it makes sense. Everybody can't learn to the same level and the same degree as everybody else. Everybody can't be a philosopher. We know that. But everybody is capable of learning new things, especially when you realize that what new things we're asked to learn depend on the things we already know. What we have to do is make sure that our graduates have the kind of skills necessary to take on new challenges and master them to the level to which they are qualified, their potential gives them. This is a system that will and can accommodate everybody. Let me be more specific than that. Under the present system and challenges we face, this is a system that must work for everybody. We cannot continue to conduct a multi-billion-dollar, perhaps trillion-dollar higher education industry in this country for 25 to 30% of our population and continue to throw away the rest, or to train them to fill social service jobs and retail jobs and those kinds of things which really don't promise the kinds of economic income people need to sustain viable families and relationships. We have got to turn our talent loose. But before we do that, we've got to realize that everybody has talents. Everybody has skills. It's a game. Sometimes students get angry with me when I say this. It's a game. There are ways to play it in order to be successful. But up to this point, the only ones that knew how to play the game are people who come from families that always win. The kids that come from families where there isn't a college tradition, where nobody in the household ever went to college before, they don't have anybody at home to show them how. How many times do you hear stories about parents offering to or being asked by their kids to help them with the homework? And the parent takes one look and says, I can't understand this stuff. What we need to do is equip our people for meaningful learning and for taking on meaningful challenges. And when we do that, people will be empowered to take control of their own lives and to go forward. That's what we need to be doing, it seems to me. And that's what a few of us have tried to do in this particular program. So, what are the major changes involved in this program? The first one is to focus attention not on the students who always make it, but on the students who almost never do. Go into this process with this commitment. You will not fail. I won't let you. If you don't handle it the first time, you go back through it again and again and again until you get it. Because until you get it, you can't move forward. So you will get it. Doing nothing is not an option. You don't have that choice. It seems to me when you basically lay it out to adults, one of the things about being an adult is that you've learned pretty much how the world works. You know what's really going on and what isn't. It seems to me that that's what we need to do in order to get this program off the ground, which is do some straight talking with our people. It used to be that if you didn't like education, you just kind of shut the whole thing down. You shut it out. You blocked it out. So you're going to fail, drop out of school. So what? You get a job in a factory. Those jobs aren't there anymore. If you can find a job that provides a meaningful income to you, then you can't hope to find somebody and raise children in a well-connected, stable home environment. Your whole life and everything that it's about depends on your willingness to take this on and do it seriously. We can show you how. And what we promise people is if you give us a chance, if you're willing to work with us, we will guarantee that you won't fail. For the first time in your life, school will be a successful experience. You're going to be on the right end rather than the wrong end. Your papers are going to come back to you marked up in black and blue, not red. You're going to find that instead of being told what you can't do, you're going to be shown what you can do and ways that you can do it better. That's the first major change. Needless to say, we've been getting a lot of pushback from traditional educators who believe that the only way to do it is the way they are currently doing it. So that's the first major change. It's the biggest one. There are a few others which are more technical, and we'll get to those. But we've gone beyond the top of the hour, so let's pause and take our 5-minute break. I've kind of been going on here for a full hour. So we're about 3 minutes after the top of the hour, so let's pause and we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come right back. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We're going to pause and take a 5-minute break. Agnes will have some music for us during the interlude. And I hope that if you are with us now, you'll stay with us. And I trust that in our second hour, we'll probably pick up some listeners that weren't with us in this first hour. Thank you, and please stay with us. We'll be right back. Thank you, and welcome to a second hour here at the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. It is a Wednesday afternoon. It is the 26th day of July in the year 2017. If you are just joining us, we welcome you to today's program. We are live. And if you have been with us through our first hour, we thank you for staying with us. We've covered a number of topics in our first hour. The first half hour dealing principally with the nature of our two-party political system, and the second half hour of our first hour dealing principally with the circumstances laid out by Thomas Edsall in his piece in the New York Times 5 or 6 days ago in terms of the so-called Donald Trump base, those voters who have consistently bought into and continue to support that Donald Trump, no matter seemingly whatever he does or doesn't do. And we talked about the issues of opportunity, the issues of reality, the extent to which white working America seems to see itself going through the same negative changes that urban blacks went through in the 1960s, a generation ago. And we've talked about a system, a education reform system that I and a couple of colleagues and close friends of mine have been trying to promote. And I think one of the last things I mentioned in the hour was that we've gotten pretty solid pushback from much of the educational establishment. These folks are uncomfortable doing things differently from the way they always did it. It's based on the assumption that only certain people are educable and that significant numbers of them are not. And the throwback to that goes all the way back into the founding period. We remember Thomas Jefferson's proposal in Virginia for the general diffusion of knowledge, and his idea that you create a competitive system and then periodically you skim the cream of ability by selecting the boy of best genius in each school from among those of the lower class, and you continue to fund their education at public expense. And beyond the first 3 years, the residue, Jefferson said, are dismissed. And so basically what you're doing then is using school itself as a vehicle to find talent. And that really has been the model for our approach to education ever since. We've had a lot of reform efforts, a lot of efforts which seemingly would change that. But the reality is that has remained the modus operandi for the way we operate our education system. Only the minority can benefit from a quality education. For the rest, what we need to do is find out ways to locate them into positions where they will feel comfortable and satisfied. And that traditionally has been our approach. And so what we were talking about right at the end of the hour was the issue of empowerment, the idea of self-learning or lifelong learning, teaching our people to become self-learners, which just happens to be the major skill demand in today's technological workplace. It's the same thing. What used to be two different tracks for education, one for the academically talented and the other for everybody else, what we have now done is reach a point with technology and the internet where those two tracks have come together and meet. The skills for both have become pretty much the same. And it's taking our education system a long time to catch up with that. I say that advisedly because I'm not sure that in many cases they've even thought about catching up at this point. So basically what we're talking about then, it seems to me, is getting away from and giving recognition to the idea that education is not content, is not information. It's the kind of skills necessary to understand that information. And when you really understand information, you can also relate new learning challenges to what you already know. It becomes a growth mechanism. You become an active lifelong learner. What you are faced with, what you are challenged to learn, is directly connected to what you already know. And how well you know it really drives your ability to master the new challenges. And so in a sense, what we've allowed ourselves to do, and this was in yesterday's program, mentioned in yesterday's program, what we've found ourselves doing is falling into the very dangerous trap of assuming that the information which comprises the content of our classes is the education. And the way you measure successful education is to measure how well every individual student has mastered that detail, that content. Going back to the very famous early 19th century Hard Times of Charles Dickens, and the school teacher in Charles Dickens who told his students about facts, facts, facts. That's what we need. Facts, more facts. That's been the driver of our education system, except for the gifted. Once you identify the gifted and you exclude them from the masses and you put them on their own separate track, then you begin to get the kind of quality education that our system has told us only a minority are able to handle. Fact of the matter is, we believe that everybody to a certain degree is able to become a self-learner. And in today's world, they better pick it up and pick it up fast. So that's kind of what we're talking about. And traditionally, one of the other things that I mentioned yesterday, just to kind of review, is the idea of intro classes, that what we call in higher education, general education courses. The beginning 100 level courses, the 101s, psychology, political science, history, math, sociology, etc., economics. Basically, the idea is that if you take the introductory course in all of those, you establish the kind of broad base of knowledge that gives you an opportunity to move on. The fact of the matter is that's not been happening. And I think part of the reason is because we've tended to confuse the content of the classes, of the courses, with education. Rather, education is the learning process that students go through when they engage that information. So what we've got to do is shift our educational priorities to the point that students are forced to engage content rather than merely memorize it in order to regurgitate it on an exam. Traditionally, then, what has been the value of these general introductory education classes, if they haven't provided the broad base of knowledge? They have served as ways to separate and to distinguish or discriminate among different students. The 25 to 30%, the brightest ones, are identified because they're the ones that get the A's. They go on to additional challenges in the academic system. Most of the others, these would be our B minus, C plus, C students. These are the students that are encouraged to go into less challenging majors. Forget the idea of nuclear physics, or forget the idea of being a brain surgeon or a trial attorney or whatever. Consider becoming a social worker or a middle school teacher or going into sales or entrepreneurism or something like that. And then basically we have the 30% of our entering freshman classes every year who do nothing but fail these introductory classes. The message that they get, this ain't for you. Find something else. Traditionally, they've been able to find something else by dropping out of college and going to work. But unfortunately, there aren't any something else's left. The jobs are disappearing rapidly. There's no place for these people to go. Consequently, it seems to me, we've got to find a way to keep them and turning the education system around to accommodate them. So that's the first thing, is focusing on the education of those that we used to eliminate from the process. A second major difference, it seems to me, in this approach is including everybody. The only way you can do that is by serving those tens of thousands of people who cannot, for a variety of reasons, access our current education system. They can't come to us. They can't come to classes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 to 9, 9 to 10, 10 to 11, which is the way our traditional higher education system has been structured. Many of them live in rural areas. They live too far away. They have families. They have jobs. They have responsibilities. They don't have money. There are just a number of things and reasons why these people can't make it. What we need to do is use the technology that's available to us now to deliver the education to them. But this is not online education. We're not talking about online degree programs or anything like that. Those turn out to be nothing but show and tell exercises in futility. They are all content-based. They are all modeled on the idea of answering the questions at the end of the chapter that all of us remember from our days in grade school. What we've got to do is deliver not just the textbooks, not just the information. We've got to deliver the education. We've got to capture the educational process as it's taking place in the college classroom. We've got to use video and audio equipment to capture not just lectures, not just the instructor telling students the information they need to know. We need to capture the learning process. We need to capture the techniques that promote creativity, critical thinking, analysis, problem solving, research, and all the rest of them. We need to capture it all, and we need to deliver it to the kitchen table of every household in our immediate region. For those who have broadband, we can do it on the internet. For those that don't have broadband, we can use the mail, the U.S. mail. We can convert the videos to DVDs, literally put them in the mail and receive the responses back, similar to what Netflix used to do. And what many of these movie services used to do, red boxes and things like that, where you pick up a movie and then you drop it in the box when you're done with it. Basically, what we're doing is delivering education. The only way to do it is to have the people teaching the courses not only teach the courses to the students on campus that they teach, but also train local facilitators, local people in the field who are high school teachers or who live in that area. What we're talking about here is developing regional or local cohorts, learning cohorts of people who are willing to get together on a regular basis with a facilitator who's trained and paid for the leadership of the educational experience on site. And what that does is shift the classroom instructor from merely a lecturer to a manager of an ongoing educational enterprise. There are costs associated with that. You've got to pay these people for the additional chores and challenges you're demanding of them. But you don't have to hire new faculty. You don't have to build new buildings. You don't have to build parking lots. You don't. In other words, what we're talking about is a process that you can do, and we've done the research, and we know this to be true. You can do this on the cheap. We're promoting this by saying we can conduct quality higher education for 25 cents on the dollar. No longer will tuition costs continue to go up. No longer will Pell Grants and federal grant programs not cover tuition and cost of books. No longer will students have to go into deep debt in order to get a college education. Everybody's going to get an education in this. And the way to do it is to bring down the costs to the point that it becomes cost effective. Everybody can do it. Everybody can be successful in it. And ultimately, we are empowering people that our system has traditionally excluded. And finally, the major change that this program produces is economic change. This becomes the foundation for economic development, especially in rural states like the one I'm speaking from, which is West Virginia. What we're talking about basically is turning people who currently have no future. They don't have skills. They can't get meaningful jobs. They have experienced nothing but negatives in school. So they're not inclined to go to college. They're not inclined to get additional training. There aren't any jobs anyway. They don't have a resume. They don't have the necessary skills. They can't make it in college. They can't make it in the employment field. They are doomed to become numbers and to get on the rolls. They are looking at lives where for the rest of their lives, they are likely to be receiving tuition, rental assistance, healthcare assistance, nutrition assistance, food stamps. In other words, this is a significant population of people who are takers from our education and public systems, our state budgets. These people traditionally have not contributed anything to economic development. Rather, they are takers of resources, of public resources. They need assistance in a variety of different areas. What we promise to do is turn them into taxpayers, to get them off the rolls, to reduce the size of budget deficits as states struggle trying to find ways to continue to support this growing population of people that they can't find jobs for. This system can do it. That's the plan. That's what we propose. And we continue to struggle to find ways to do it. I will say in conclusion that we're all retired. We've got the experience. One of our members, one of our group of three, has been a vice president and academic dean at a number of higher education institutions. He's a PhD in literature. Another is a PhD in mathematics. A third, for better than 40 years, was in human resource development at the corporate level. He's been fulfilling human resource needs in corporate America for better than 40 years. We know what the workplace demands. We know what employers demand. We know what increasing technology requires. We know what higher education does. And we think we've got the package that at some point in time is going to take over and work. And we're feverishly trying to get this program off the ground ourselves while we're still able. So that's the program. And that's the background or the context for this program. I think it's very significant. I really do believe it's very significant. I've been in higher education for better than a half century. And I'm convinced that this is the answer. But the first thing we've got to do is get people to ask questions. Because until people know that there are questions that require answers, then they really don't have any reason to listen. So that's what we're trying to do. I really would welcome your reaction to this program, your reaction to the analysis, to Edsel's analysis, to the sociological input of prominent sociologists and political scientists, to his research conclusions. I really think that this is the key to making our political system work the way it ought to. We've been talking off and on for the whole 4 years, close to 4 years that we've been on the air. We have been talking about our political system and our efforts to try to get the system functioning the way it was designed to function. A key to it, no question, is an educated citizenry, is an informed electorate. And I think the what we talked about at the beginning of our program today in the first hour, which is the role of big money in our elections and the extent to which our two parties have become ideological extremes rather than two groups of people trying to meet in the middle and find solutions to problems. Basically, the only way to make that system work is to educate all of our people, not just a few of them. And I think that that's what this system proposes to do. We're at half past the hour, our second hour in today's program, and I didn't even give you the phone number. I just launched into this stuff at the beginning and never even did the housework necessary. So let me quickly do that, because I would love to hear from you. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. My email address, if you'd like to communicate with me that way, waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906@gmail.com. And then our Facebook page. And I will say, as I did yesterday, that there's really been not a recent posting on our Facebook page for about a week because I've been gone. But this evening, I do plan to put the piece, the article that I've been using in our first hour today, this education program. I'm going to post it on our Facebook page. It's been submitted to the Charleston Gazette. The editor has it, so I have every reason to believe that at some point in time it will appear in print. But not waiting for that, I will post it on our Facebook page and you can read it for yourself. And I encourage you to do that, and I encourage you to react to it, because we're still learning. This is not locked in concrete here. We think we know, but anything you can tell us that would clarify how well we know what we think we know would be welcome. And I do indeed solicit your comments on this as well as on everything else that we do here at the Virtual Center. I've got a couple of things that I wanted to get to today. I really didn't expect to spend an hour and a half on this material, but it's obviously where I am, and it's what I've been consumed with, and consequently, it just obviously runs on and takes longer for me. And again, I could be, I could be a little bit overwhelmed with this, and I've lost the ability to see the forest for the trees, maybe. But be that as it may, I really do think it's valuable, and I hope that you found it to be helpful. There are two issues that I did want to deal with today, and I'm just going to make a choice between them, and we'll hold off the other one for our next time we get back together again, which will be next Monday at our regular starting time, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Earlier this month, going on 3 weeks ago now, during his trip to Europe, when the president was meeting in Europe with European leaders, when he met with Vladimir Putin, you'll remember that his first stop on his European trip was Poland. And he delivered an address in Warsaw, which got a lot of attention. And many of his critics acknowledged that this was one of his better speeches. Unlike so much that he does, and I've mentioned the Boy Scout address that he gave here in West Virginia 2 nights ago. Unlike that, many of his major critics have acknowledged that his Warsaw address was meaningful and really needed some attention. It was worthy of attention and worthy of comment. Some of his supporters believed it was the best speech he's ever given. A conservative critic of his, Charles Krauthammer, who's been a continual critic of Donald Trump, gave the Poland speech about the best credit that he could give it. He called it Reagan-esque. Elliot Abrams, noted neoconservative from the Bush administration, found a lot to like about Donald Trump's Warsaw address. If you read that address, there's quite a bit in it. Unlike many of these people, I don't believe that the address is necessarily credible. I think it's important. I also think that it was written, obviously, for him by foreign policy spokesmen and consultants. This is obviously not something that he wrote himself. But it also was a speech where he didn't wander off and talk about all of this personal stuff and the size of his inauguration crowds and the tremendous victory he succeeded in getting in November and all the rest of it. He was in Poland, and he went out of his way to credit the bravery and the history of the Polish people and their willingness to withstand and fight back against the kind of devastation and cruelty that they experienced during the Holocaust, during Russian control, during the Cold War, and going all the way back to World War I and some of the events of World War I. But there's something else about this speech that is very significant. And that is the degree to which Donald Trump, for the first time in this speech, seemed to be moving in the direction of America's traditional role in the world. Throughout the campaign and through the first several months of his administration, the president's priority seemed to be to distance the United States from the involvement in the affairs and problems of the rest of the world. As you'll recall, he backed out of the TPP agreement in the Pacific. He threatened to ditch NAFTA, and at the last moment, he backed out of that and basically said that he wanted to reconstruct or renegotiate NAFTA. He pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement most recently. He insulted Angela Merkel and Germany. He insulted the Prime Minister of Australia. He insulted the President of Mexico over his demand that there be a wall on our southern border and that Mexico pay for it. He irritated the Chinese by raising serious questions about the One China policy and going directly to the president, taking a call from the president of Taiwan. and thereby threatening the legitimacy of America's traditional one China policy. And he continually started to talk about, throughout the campaign and into the first months of his presidency, about America first, about the issue of nationalism, efforts to limit immigration, efforts to keep out Muslim refugees, efforts to control the migration of Muslims into the United States. It seemed to many people that he was setting out to undo everything that American foreign policy was based upon from the end of World War II up to the present. Traditionally, the United States had assumed the role of leadership in the world as a result of World War II. Even through the administration of George W. Bush, America was committed to the idea of American leadership and American values spreading throughout the world. Basically, the idea was that America would reform the world in its own image. The idea being that the more nations that were organized and structured like us, the less likely there would be problems. The statement made many times by George Bush that democracies don't go to war with each other. Trump seemed to be in violation of all of those basic agreements, all those principles, all those values and givens. But the fact of the matter is, there's quite a bit more to it than that. Stephen Wertheim, who's a foreign policy authority, I can't remember the university he's connected with now, but he wrote a column on the 22nd of July about this Warsaw speech. And in it, he talked about, this is his title, Donald Trump's plan to save Western civilization. And what his point is that contrary to everything we've believed about President Trump through the campaign and well into the first few months of his administration, there were things revealed in the Warsaw speech which indicated that President Trump was ideologically moving more into the mainstream of America's role in foreign policy. For the first agonizing months of his presidency, you'll recall, President Trump refused to acknowledge or to condone or support Article 5 of the NATO agreement, which said that an attack on one member of NATO is an attack on all. In other words, President Trump was hesitant to reconfirm America's commitment to NATO. Rather, when he went to Europe the first time, he criticized European nations for not contributing their fair share to the United Nations. He felt that European nations were not holding up their financial obligations, that the United States was bearing an unfair, inordinate burden in supporting the United Nations and in supporting NATO. And all of this led to the idea, and it was culminated, obviously, in President Trump's decision to withdraw from the Paris Agreement on climate. And at that point, European leaders like Angela Merkel and President Macron of France, the new president of France, made the commitment that they would move into the void, that it was up to them to provide the leadership for Europe, since the United States clearly was backing out of its leadership obligations. The same thing was going on in the Far East with China. Most people have concluded that America's determination to withdraw from Paris, from the Paris Accords, created an open road for China to assume world leadership, especially in renewable energy. And China is doing that. What Wertheim has pointed out is that ever so slightly, ever so gradually, there are important changes happening in the perspective of President Trump. And the point he makes in his very first paragraph is one that I want to make sure that we all have a chance to think about. He talks about the challenge, the problem that America has confronted since the collapse of the Soviet Union, since the end of the Cold War, since well before World War II, and especially after World War II, America's entire situation standing in the world has been defined by opposition to Soviet communism. And many people began to realize and write about what they saw as the positive, constructive aspects of Soviet-American hostility during the Cold War. Much of what we did in the area of defense policy, defense spending, was driven by our need to protect ourselves, our security, against possible Soviet attack. Obviously, the Soviets did the same thing. In a sense, then, what ended up was a relationship in which each side needed the other. Much of what we became ideologically and politically in the world was defined by the existence of the Soviet Union, the Soviet threat. And ditto for them, we have to assume. With the collapse of the Soviet Union in the late 80s, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, this changed. America's direction and focus in the world changed with the demise of the Soviet Union, the Soviet threat. What we were was defined by the challenge we faced. Once that challenge was gone, we've had a difficult time trying to find ourselves again and get our bearings, because everything that defined us was no longer there. It's not in any way the same thing, but I can share with you a personal example from a good friend of mine of the same kind of situation. Some years ago, he and his wife split, and both, in a mutual way, ended up getting a divorce, and it was mutual. They were both wonderful people. They had 3 children, this couple. There were 3 boys. The 2 oldest ones were born with muscular dystrophy. And when I knew them, they were both in wheelchairs. The youngest boy did not have muscular dystrophy. He was born healthy. And through middle school and through high school, he ran track. And he used to say all the time that he ran for his brothers because they couldn't run. And their dad, my friend, used to bring the boys in their chairs to the track meets so they could watch their brother run and win. It wasn't too long after I no longer see them. I went to Richmond, and they were still here in West Virginia. It wasn't too long after we were in Richmond that I got word that both boys, both muscular dystrophy boys, had died. And that the only one that they had left was Ricky, the youngest. He was in high school. And then their dad, my friend, got a job teaching at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. and the family relocated to Alabama. And they weren't there but 3 or 4 months when their only son, living son, Ricky, was killed by a drunk driver coming home from a fishing trip one weekend. And so for this wonderful couple, all 3 children were gone. What they realized very quickly was that their entire lives had been devoted to taking care of their boys. When those boys were gone, both of them realized that there really wasn't anything left to keep them together. What they had in common was the boys. And so after a while, they mutually divorced. As sad as that situation is, I think it's very, very much like what happened to America in terms of its standing in the world with the fall of the Soviet Union. What defined us, what defined our security system, our defense budget, our military, all of it, was the Soviet threat. When that threat disappeared, much of our economic and military system was left foundering for a purpose. Francis Fukuyama, a historian of American foreign policy, in the early 1990s, wrote a book entitled The End of History. And in it, he argued that history as we knew it changed with the fall of the Soviet Union. That everything that made America what it is was now gone. And consequently, that the world no longer was worried about the threat of nuclear war. And his prediction, which was very positive, was that a world of turmoil and challenge, which is the world that most of us grew up with and knew so well, was permanently gone. And that this was a time when the world could get about improving economies for people and uplifting and eliminating poverty in the world and giving people the opportunity to live the standard of life that all of them were entitled to as human beings on this planet. Fukuyama's approach was very positive. But the fact of the matter is it didn't turn out that way, as we know. We ended up getting involved in things like Iraq and Afghanistan and all the rest of it. And of course, the threat, the Muslim challenge, reared its head, beginning in the Middle East with the hostage crisis in the 1970s under President Jimmy Carter. And the whole situation seemed to decline and deteriorate after that. In the early 20th century, Bill Clinton in the 90s talked about technology as being the bridge to the 21st century. And his argument was that the internet and the technology revolution promised the world the kind of standard of living that all of us were entitled to. And along came George Bush, and President Bush talked about spreading freedom throughout the world, about expanding freedom. In ways that I'm looking through my materials here. I have a fairly significant quotation somewhere from President Bush on this. I can't seem to lay my hands on it right now. But the point was that America's standing in the world was envisioned as being an effort to reconstitute ourselves throughout the world. President Bush, for example, you'll remember, made the comment that America's objective in Iraq was to create a functioning democracy in the center of the Middle East. And of course, we know that the whole situation fell apart and we didn't handle it very well and all the rest of it. We don't need to go there. But the fact of the matter is, as part of this, the United States assumed leadership in NATO, the United Nations, and on the world scene. The United States assumed prominent positions in these international trade agreements with the idea that this was the best avenue toward toward eliminating poverty in the world by increasing the standard of living throughout the underdeveloped world. What we were unable to do in the process is protect jobs. And not only here in the United States, but Great Britain and elsewhere began to lose jobs as employers began to relocate to third world areas of the world in order to save labor costs and reduce production costs and make money. And the consequences of that is what we've been talking about today, which is the election of Donald Trump and the emergence of a working, uneducated, white middle class, lower middle class, that sees a very dire future for themselves as the basic reason for supporting the presidency of Donald Trump. So that's kind of where we are. And it looked like President Trump was withdrawing us from all of that. His key advisor, Stephen Bannon, talked about economic nationalism. I was going to say fascism, nationalism, and authoritarianism in government. And President Trump bought into it. And it looked like President Trump was committed to undoing and withdrawing from all of these agreements, withdrawing from the leadership role in the world that president after president since World War II has continued to define and refine for us. The fact of the matter is, Stephen Wertheim, in his article on July 22nd, finds that in Trump there is a major change. And basically, the major change is what Wertheim argues is a creative solution to the problem that has confronted every president since the collapse of the Soviet Union, namely that the United States lacks an adversary against which to define itself and orient its foreign policy. We've never been able to replace the Soviet Union as a justification for what we wanted and needed to do. Wertheim says that in place of the single enemy that the Soviet Union was, Mr. Trump offers the world. He laid into everything and everyone, from the Islamic State to China to NATO to immigrants. In other words, we were going to take on everybody. It was us versus the world, possibly with the exception of Russia and Vladimir Putin, and we know what that's all about. Basically, what Wertheim has done is give us a look, especially based on the Warsaw speech that President Trump gave in Warsaw on July 6th, in which he claimed that we were really all a community of nations, that we were in defense of a way of life, and that we were charged, all of us, with defending civilization itself. And it's kind of interesting, in the Atlantic magazine, Peter Beinart writes about this speech and points out that in that Poland speech, Donald Trump referred 10 times to the West and 5 times to our civilization. Basically, he's talking about the Judeo-Christian tradition that traditionally has defined Western civilization, and he is beginning to see America's role as defending that and reconstituting that. It has both ethnic and racial overtones. If it's real, it's extremely important. On the other hand, it may not be real because we really find it very difficult to nail down President Trump and know once and for all exactly what he does stand for. We've reached the top of the hour on this Wednesday. This is the end of our program today, but also the end of our broadcast this week. I want to thank you for listening. I invite you to tune in again here at the Virtual Center next Monday at our regular time. I hope you have a wonderful evening, a wonderful weekend. Be kind to each other, and thank you.